Welcome back to Behavioral Science for Brands, a podcast where Richard Schotten and I go deep on behavioral science, thinking about how we can make real connections between academics and practical marketing. Today, we are very excited to have our guest, Mark Earls, with us. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, how you doing?
Very good, very good. Now, if you don't mind, Mark, I'm going to shower you with a little bit of history, and we're going to ask for you to, yes, see no evil, hear no evil. Mark, friends, is a pioneer and award-winning author, writer, consultant on human behavior, on contemporary communications and behavior change. Much of our industry, the marketing and advertising industry's work with behavioral economics has been pioneered by Mark. And he has ran major departments in ad agencies, both large and small, from St. Luke's to Ogilvy. Mark's latest project, which we're going to hear more about today, all pulls on how we think about time, both how we can make good decisions in uncertain times, how we can feel less caught off guard during times of uncertainty like pandemics and war, and how we can escape unhelpful stories of our past in order to choose better and develop memories of the future. His previous books have included Welcome to the Creative Age, Heard, which is everyone's favorite, I'll Have What She's Having, and Copy, Copy, Copy. Mark, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here with us. We're very excited to have you here today. So let's take a step back. What brought you to the industry? How did you get involved in this, in the marketing, advertising, brand building world?
So I've got to say, I blame my friend Jamie.
Okay.
Right? So I was at college, I had no idea what I was going to do. No idea. And Jamie was really organised, and he and I used to drink together. But he was really organised, got himself a job in an advertising agency.
Very fancy.
I had no idea what to do. I was taking American students and college kids around Europe in a big bus, right? And thought, oh God, what am I going to do afterwards? I don't know. I can't do this when I'm 30. Imagine still doing this when you're 30. So I then, one day I got a call from him. He said, listen, I've decided advertising is really superficial, but you'd like it. And I'm going to go and be an investment banker, right? So that's what he went off to do. And I then wrote lots of letters and blagged away and somehow. And I found within about 6 months that the thing I was really interested in was the people bit. Mm-hmm. Not the people bit in terms of HR and all of that, but the people in terms of why people do what they do. And I had some really good mentors, and one of them in particular, Paul Felwick, who is a giant of that advertising strategy world, was a DDP for many years. Mm. He said to me, listen, if you're going to try and argue with people like research companies or marketing people, you've got to know the basis of their models better than they do. So you've got to go and read it. And so I then got sent off on a journey, which I'm still now reading everything that I can get my hands on about that. And then that, quite at the time, the thing that was really exciting for people, and it still is, I think, a bit too exciting, is how the brain works. And the brain is related to behavior. So Damasio and people like that were really exciting. But I was already reading other stuff. I was already reading Durkheim as a great French sociologist. I was reading Irving Goffman, a social psychologist who did stuff around, how we present ourselves in a social context, or stigma. That's another one of his great ones. And so I'd already had a sort of broader view than just it's about brains, which the advertising world loved brains because, right, you can point at them, you show pictures of them,
It makes sense.
Totally, totally.
It's on paper.
So that's how I got there. And I was, applying it as I went and building up a set of knowledge. And I started writing it, I started talking about it in public and started putting it to work in the businesses that I was involved in running. And then I came to a point when I realized, no, you've really got to go and make this work separately. You can't stay in.
It can't be a side hustle.
It can't be a side hustle. And it's a nice thing to have. If it's going to take off, you've got to really put your shoulder to this. And so I took a walk and wrote a book called Heard. That was the start of it. I'll tell you just a brief story. Yeah. So I do writing and talking and consulting now. And I've done a lot of stuff around the world. In places like Central America, in India, in Sub-Saharan Africa, and these are really, for me, it's a joy because I get to meet people, understand different ways of seeing the world, and
of course.
Also, here's the thing: I was once doing a thing in Mumbai, in India, and Indian executives tend to be in most Indian companies tend to be from the higher castes. India is a very caste-ridden society. And these people don't see people who are below them. They just don't see them. That kind of gets my goat a bit, but
Yes,
but
yes,
that's how you
I
have
could
to
imagine.
survive in that culture. So you don't see them. And what I did is, rather than have a week long in a darkened room with flip charts and post-its and all that kind of stuff, getting a new consumer strategy, reading the decks that they'd all prepared, I lined a row of tuk-tuks up outside and said, right, listen, guys, your job today is go and live with a tuk-tuk driver and their family. Find out what really matters to them. Find out what their lives are like. And one of them, the CMO, came back and he was in tears. He said, I've never seen these people. I've never seen them. And I said, well, how can you run a business that serves them if, for me, it's an extreme version. It's a nice, colourful, exotic tale.
Absolutely.
But at the same point, it's true that we don't care enough in the marketing and advertising world about the people that we serve. And we don't serve the clients. We don't serve the brands. We serve the people out there.
Yeah. Ultimately, the buyers of the products in the real world are the people that we need to understand and connect with.
Yeah.
There's an amazing 1977 study by Lee Ross.
Yes.
And it's a thought experiment, so it has its weaknesses. But he says to people, look, imagine you get a speeding ticket. You've been doing 35 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone, and the policeman catches you, gives you a ticket, gives you a fine. When you get home, though, you realise this ticket is riddled with errors, wrong car make, wrong number plate, all sorts of problems. And he asks the participants to say, would you accept the fine or would you contest it? And people give an answer. And then the real experiment starts, where he says to them, and now what do you think other people would do?
Mm.
And what he finds is, if a participant would have accepted the fine, they think most other people would have accepted it. Whereas if they contest the fine, they think most other people would contest it. So he called this the false consensus effect.
Mm.
The fact that whatever behaviours, attitudes or beliefs we have, we assume more people have those beliefs than actually do.
Mm.
So if you're a marketer and you are selling to the public, you cannot assume what you think and believe is representative. You have to go out and challenge those beliefs, whether it's through experimentation or through meeting people, discussing with them, anything to challenge.
I'd go further than that. I think you're absolutely right. It's a great example, a great experiment. I think that marketers need to like their customers. That seems like a really weird thing to say, but it's really important. You've got to like these people. You've got to find something about them you like. And I know I've had clients over the years, whether it's in ad agency world or whether it's as a consultant, you go, oh, who are these?
Yeah.
But you've got to find something, because if you don't have a thing that you like about them, you're going to treat them badly and you're not going to listen to them. And I think it's a really big lesson. And, I still haven't seen any business that sets out to like their customers.
Especially in 2023, I think the culture is attuned to you're not authentic, and being authentic means finding something to like or love about your buyers, about the people that are going to use your brand.
Totally.
And and especially because social media allows us to move ideas much faster. I think that flag that this is inauthentic happens to generate much more steam.
It's what the psychotherapists would call leakage.
Okay.
So your bad intent.
It
leaks out in your behavior and between your words, and people read it really quickly.
Yeah. So fascinating.
There's something you said earlier, you mentioned around too much advertising and marketing being focused on creating beautiful things rather than changing behavior. But I think you've come with 3 brands who maybe do things differently.
Yes.
So did you want to take us through one of those? What brand do you think has applied insights about human nature really effectively?
So the first one, this is a kind of a sell for the work that I did with Professors Alex Bentley and Mike O'Brien. And it's some work we did to understand, to map, if you like, how people choose. And a really simple 2x2, a 4-box. On the left-hand side is independent choice, people choosing on their own, which is how we like to believe in the Anglo-Saxon cultures. In North America, in Northern Europe, we say that's how people choose, because that's how people are. Ultimately, people are individuals who live on their own.
I sense your skepticism.
Word to the wise, virtually every other culture says, no, we are social creatures who are connected with each other. Ubuntu, the sub-Saharan African idea that Mandela and Tutu used to pull that country together, South Africa after the end of apartheid. That's essentially, we're a mutual species. We depend on each other, and we have, we're a social primate. It's now become common for people to say that, after all, we are a social creature. Yes, we are. Not just a bit of a social creature, not just after the fact, but fundamentally. So that means that's a dimension we don't take into account. So independent on one hand, and then social on the other.
Okay.
Right. So let's just leave it with that. And I won't do the other dimension because it just makes the point. So you can tell from patterns, this is from diffusion science, you can tell from patterns you've got in behavioral data like sales or clicks or searches or whatever, you can tell where you live on that dimension from independent choice, choosing on my own, to social choice. And the reason why that's important is not because I'm right and you're wrong. It's important because a socially shaped behavior needs different kinds of interventions than an independent behavior. We imagine in the Anglo-Saxon world that people need to get told how good this product is, how much better it is, or we need to find an insight maybe about them and their individual needs. I just think that casts it very often in the wrong way. This is the side where people do what they do because of what other people do.
Yeah.
As you were saying in that experiment. Social proof is one, but we underestimate it. The framework, the East framework that behavioral science uses now, has only one dimension, which is social. One of four. The Mindspace thing that the UK government's behavioural insights team created has one of 9. So it's just we don't underestimate the importance of it. So my case study is of Sony Electronics, and Professor Alex Benton and I did this analysis of sales data in, I think we've done it in lots of other categories outside consumer electronics, but we did this in, I think we had about a dozen European markets, and we did it across about 12 categories.
Okay. So
everything from mobile phones, smartphones, to laptops, to cameras, to loads of shit, right? And we imagine, or Sony imagined, because they used to produce these really thick booklets with instructions in, right? Imagine that you have to tell individuals about the speeds and feeds, as they're called in electronics. In other words, the detailed product features and why they were better than another. And they endlessly struggle to find the differentiation of themselves in any way to talk about it interestingly. But they bang on about this, and that's what the brochure was for. Turns out that virtually all of those categories are bought on a social basis, either by looking what the expert use. The Canon and Nikon both have huge user communities in which even the experts look at other experts. Professional photographers look at what other people use, and you want to know about it. And of course, you want to protect your status by having seen to be an expert, but you still check out what other people are doing. Same with guitars. For being honest, it's exactly the same. People will tell you that it's all about the quality of the thing, but it's not. And if it's not based on the quality of the thing, then don't try and persuade people.
Don't sell
on that. Sell on the other stuff, or make the other stuff work. And there are a number of ways to do it. You don't just have to say, and everyone else is buying it this way.
Yeah.
You can also choose your media, and this is what we did with Sony. So Sony were very good on broadcast media and targeted media, but it was always about selling to you, the target, individual in the target. So we said, no, let's shift the mix. Let's shift the mix, go from this side, from independent choice, independent media, independent messaging, to this side. And it was a fundamental shift in their use of, across Europe, and their sales went up 25% in the first year and a half. So look, that's not a full advertising effectiveness in Effie's case, but it is really significant. Once you decide on the basis of how people choose to alter your intervention strategy, then you'll likely be more effective than you would be otherwise.
And did you find, you mentioned there were 12, I think you said 12 markets.
Yeah.
Was there a variance? So
not really.
Anglo-Saxons claim they're individuals.
Yeah. So we tell ourselves we're individuals, but we're not. The first thing when in the US, when things get difficult, and I was working with Ogilvy started working with Ogilvy around the time of 9/11. What happens? You pull the wagons in a circle, to use the cliche. You get together. US is an individualist culture, but it's based on small town.
Yes.
It's based on community. It's based on mutuality, and yes, a lot of competition, but that's the basic unit. But we tell ourselves otherwise. And I think that's really important to remember, and to check your assumption whenever you go anywhere. Go into a market, say, are people buying it as you say, like I think I buy it?
Yeah.
Or how do they buy it? And then to use that as your framing thing to then lead to potential strategies that you can test.
So if there's so much evidence around the power of emphasising popularity, emphasising the social nature of a product, Why don't more brands do it?
Because culturally we much prefer the stuff about individuals things. Also, I think it doesn't feature the brain stuff.
Yeah.
You know, neuroscientists have had an absolute bonanza in the last 10 years. There are loads of them. If you look at the online groups about behavioural science, it's every bloody where. It's neuroscience, and you know, and nobody seems to realise quite what we're dealing with, and we have those fMRI scans. You know, because the fMRI scans were basically showing they're taking data. There's not a picture. It's not a film. It's not a camera. It's taking feeds from your from that part of your body, just where the hemoglobin, the iron in your blood, approaching a certain part of the brain, responds to the radiation that's put in. That's what it is. It's not a picture. Taking the feeds out and then reconstructing it as if it was a brain.
Yeah.
We imagine that it looks like a brain, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it isn't. It's just a bunch of feeds, a bunch of electronic feeds back, and that's all it is. But we imagine it is, and so therefore it's this pretense of reality, and it's very hard not to say, oh, it's in that part of the brain. And people who want to, neuroscientists like to tell us really simple stories about the brain, and we like to hear them, like the left and right brain fallacy. It's a nonsense. It's an absolute nonsense. And the brain is not a geographically split thing. It's a system, and it's also connected to the body as well. You know, if you want to look at emotions, I made myself very unpopular a few years ago with neuroscientists by saying, actually, why don't we, instead of doing neuromarketing, we do gastro-marketing, because we know that that actually our emotions are much more readily available in our gastric area, and it's frankly it's much easier to access and much safer.
Okay,
messier, but but the point being is, I think we culturally we're culturally biased, and we like things that are we live in North America and Northern Europe are positivist. We like to have things to point to. We like to have concrete stuff. We like to believe there's a root reductionist, a root physical thing that explains all this stuff, and we like to have simple answers. That's why. And there's lots of money around brain science. Lots of people wanting to sell us brain science.
Do you think that will change over time? You know, if people adopt some of these principles around the social animal that we are, they see the success, then surely they'll return to more and more.
Yeah, it's not as exciting though. It really isn't as exciting. And you know, funding both in research terms for the basic research in academia, but also funding from clients. Wanting to fund stuff. Can you get me something that shows really the brain, how it really works and how we really touch people's emotions? Can you really show me that? And something I can put on a chart and show the investors, or you know, that's what I really want, something dramatic. Not people seem to really like this, and other people seem to too. And that seems to have. I'd like to get micro.
Yeah, to draw for the listeners that are following at home. Can you go back to the work with Sony and specifically the change that you made from being more individualistic to being more social?
Yeah.
What changed in the work that drove that?
So the fundamental thing is a change in the channels.
Okay.
So instead of trying to find ways that we could target people, we find ways that we can get between people. So it was early days in the social platforms, but that was still really important. Trying to find ways that we were viewing opportunities where people would be together rather than just doing an eyeball count.
I see.
So that kind of thing. So you change the channels. You can change the messaging as well. And the messaging is good, but quite often, you know, if everyone tells me that something's really popular, I'm the kind of person that goes, I want to do something else. Yeah. So I think we all have that in different categories at different times, right?
Sure.
So you have to be careful with the messaging piece.
Yeah.
But the channels, how we use these channels, because the channels have assumptions baked into them that we can use. We need to be aware of them in order to make good decisions about them. So that's the big change.
Thank you.
Change the channels, not change the messaging.
Got it.
Okay, so we've got first example, Sony.
Yep.
And the power of recognising we're a social species, not an individual one.
Yep.
Second brand that you're interested in?
Second brand, I'm going to talk about something that's at this is right at the heart of the UK's interest in behavioural science.
Yes.
And this is a case from the UK Treasury. So that's they collect our taxes and manage our. So that's what they do.
Yeah.
And this case study was about, it was a very simple, and I love the simplicity of it, very simple piece of medium. It wasn't a grand piece of theatre. It was the letter that they send to people to remind them to fill in and file their tax return.
Okay.
So that's That's
An important letter.
it's a really important letter.
Yeah.
How do you improve the response rate? How do you get people to do it more? And it was a great opportunity because you can do an experiment, right?
Yep.
You have lots of different examples. The winning thing was had two features in it that were really important, as I remember. The first of which is you actually personalize it.
Dear Mark.
Dear Mark.
Yeah, got it.
Secondly, you put you in the context of your peers and their behavior. Most people like you have already. So you set a social norm and you express it through a social norm, and that significantly improved the response rate. Right?
Yeah. So this is the campaign where they said 9 out of 10 people pay their tax on time, or 9 out of 10 people in Birmingham or Burnley.
Absolutely, and you can tailor it in
Yeah.
different ways you want, but the underlying mechanic is a social mechanic, the social norms that they're exploiting. And I this is still the behavioural insight, the nudge unit, as they're called, the behavioural insights teams. Number one case, and it's the thing that made them famous, and it's the thing that got them a lot of funding, and I think it's really good because it's really low. It's low tech, right?
Yes, I've seen one of those pictures of the letters, and it's a black and white letter. It looks like it's printed on paper that's been through the printer 6 times.
It's been through my printer.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's really low tech, and it's not fancy or anything, and it's the kind of thing that you could do. Any business could do this. Any organisation could try this kind of stuff and experiment with different solutions, and you can get the results yourself. And I love it for that. And I love it because it's social, clearly, and that's the insight that they're using. And I think that it's really important to remember that number one case that they have made their reputation on. They've done lots of other good things, right? But that's the number one thing. In the UK, it worked. It didn't work so well when they tried it in the US, interestingly. But that's for other reasons, I suspect. They didn't get to the bottom of that.
Well, let's drive to that. What would your take be on why it would be different?
I think I don't know who they were writing to in the UK compared to the US. I don't know the underlying connection with paying tax in the UK and the US, and I don't. We have a very different system here, and
Yes.
we have very little in the way of tax credits, for example, and there's no incentivization for philanthropy or charitable giving or anything. None of that stuff. So it's interesting that. I haven't seen. I don't think they've published. They might have done. Correct me if I'm wrong.
So I haven't seen it in America. I know they have published data. I think it was Guatemala where they'd applied that similar principle of telling Guatemalans that most people pay their tax, and that had a positive effect. So I hadn't.
So it doesn't work everywhere, and that's really interesting, right? Because it says that culture is really important.
Yeah,
and culture is something we share with each other. It's not something that just lives in my brain. And that's so again, I'm going to social.
Yes. Well, that's
playing this hand really hard, right?
It's an important hand to play.
But that the interesting development, which is this variability, and sometimes there are critics of behavioural science or critics of this field who say, well, it didn't work in America, therefore the whole thing's bogus. Whereas it might just be a recognition that behavioural science findings aren't laws. We're not particles that are influenced by forces. We have our own free will, and all a behavioural science insight does is increase the probability that an intervention will work. So testing it, making sure the context hasn't changed wildly from the original experiment is a super important thing.
Yeah, that's right. I use the metaphor of maps. So we have better maps to navigate where we want to go to.
Yeah.
The map is not the landscape. The map is not the ground itself. The map is a representation. The map can be inaccurate, but a bad map is really unhelpful. And a bad map is often the stuff we carry around in our heads, assuming that's how people behave.
Right.
And that's what I aim to do, is to give people not rules of thumb, if you like, but you can test them.
Yeah.
In particular contexts. And I've worked a lot with Experian, a fantastic US-based company, who manage credit
scores.
And the idea of a credit score is really interesting. It's a very Anglo-Saxon thing. Except it's not Saxon, because the Germans don't get it at all, because the Germans don't borrow like we do.
Like Americans do.
Or just over the border in Holland, they love it.
Yeah.
They love personal lending.
Yeah.
They absolutely love it. And they love the credit score, but the Germans don't. They just don't. They won't use a credit card inside the country.
Interesting.
So actually trying to sell, you'd think they were really similar, but they're not. So you always, and I've worked with them a lot, and each time we go to another country, we go, let's just check our assumptions here, and then see what the data says.
Yeah. Mark, maybe I can ask you to spend a little time on this point, because I think it's very interesting for everybody listening. If you want to teach folks how to check your assumptions and how to make sure it's right for the culture that you're serving, that you have to find somebody to love in. How do you do that? What would be your guidance for marketers?
So I think there are two things. One of which is which you can't beat, which is the qualitative way of doing it, which is actually listen to people, get them to tell you how they do what they do, and find out what lies behind there. There's a very good book by an English anthropologist written for our American friends largely, called Watching the English. And it's this fantastic anthropologist. She goes around and does experiments, which, and as an American, I'm sure you appreciate this.
Yeah.
She deliberately bumps into people on public transport, on the tube train, the metro, whatever, and then she watches what they do.
Oh, how interesting!
And we're so caught up with politeness in the UK, and so caught up with it, and she identified something called the self-reflexive apology. So you apologize for something that someone has already done to you.
They bump into you.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't see that if you swam in the culture. And this is the thing about culture, is you swim in it like fish in water. You don't see culture. You don't.
You swim in it by doing qualitative.
And you swim in it by also then trying. So where's the point where we're going to see whether this particular assumption we've got holds or not?
Yeah.
And let's find that pressure point and test it.
Got it.
Interestingly, everything we've discussed up to now has been around the experiments varying in their impacts across country. Across country is America versus Guatemala versus the UK. Interestingly, with that HMRC tax study, even within Britain, there was a variance by group. So they found one group where telling them that 9 out of 10 people have paid their tax on time actually backfired. It was the super wealthy. So if you were a top 5% debtor, knowing that everyone else had paid made you less likely to pay, because there was a fundamental belief that they weren't like.
And I'm not a sucker.
Right.
I think it's
right. That's the inevitable feeling.
But I wouldn't argue that they are individuals, though. I think what would have been an interesting follow-up study would have been to tailor the message. 9 out of 10 successful business people pay their tax on time.
Totally.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly right. Exactly right. But then it becomes an iterative thing. So you go, actually, we got this result. Let's test again.
Yeah.
Either we've got this slightly wrong.
Yeah.
Or there's something else going on that overrides it. Yeah.
That's right.
And to be fair, they did run a follow-up test, and I think the winning. I don't think it involved that tailoring that I mentioned, but the winning example was when the very wealthy business people were told, if you don't pay your 50 grand tax bill, we cannot afford 1 or 2 teaching assistants. So making the loss of the exchequer concrete affect people's behaviour when a more abstract example happens.
I think that's exactly right. That's exactly the kind of thing that you would do if you got that result back. And when you're dealing with letters, there's no cost in the experiment.
That's right.
That's right. Absolutely.
Really.
So why don't we take a break, and when we come back, we're going to learn more from Mark on another example of how behavioral science is really driving important outcomes.
Behavioral Science for Brands is brought to you by Method 1. Method 1 builds digital-first marketing systems that help brands grow. They are behavior change experts who solve business challenges by creating meaningful connections with consumers, with deep disciplines in many brand categories. Reach out to them if you'd like to be leveraging behavioral science in your marketing or advertising.
And welcome back to Behavioral Science for Brands. Richard Schotten, Mark Earls, and I are talking all things behavioral science, effectiveness in marketing, and let's turn our attention to a third example, Mark.
So this is very topical this week in the UK, but it represents a larger thing, I think. It's the opposition Labour Party has just had its conference this week, and they've launched a new slogan, which is "Give Britain back its future." Give Britain back its future. Which I think is super smart. It's different from the other 2 examples. So the first one we talked about was, large patterns in data and how that might change your deployment of activity or focus. Second one we talked about was letters and how the messaging might change, and you could test that with lots of experiments. This is very different. This is an insight, one of your rules of thumb about how people behave. It's an abiding truth. I think it's one of the top 3 behavioral science biases that we talk about is loss avoidance.
Oh yes.
Yeah, it's just everywhere, and it's really important to everybody. And if you evoke it, can be really big. Now, give Britain back its future let's just pass that, take it apart. So, first of all, give the role of the people who are saying this, the role of the Labour Party. We're going to give it back to you. So we're not going to make you. We're going to find this thing and give it to you. we're going to give it back to you. So it was yours originally, but someone's stolen it. And then it's the future. And so it's very positive. There's a positive spin to it. And I think the future is the least important bit in this. Those three elements, to give Britain back its future. And give it back to you, I think, that's the nub of it. And we've seen that in other political campaigns. So
we saw maybe the first example I can think of was actually, I think, a Reagan, didn't he do Make America Great Again?
Yep.
We've got Dominic Cummings, who was the mastermind behind the Brexit vote. And originally the slogan was supposedly "Take Control."
Yep.
He put in "Take back control," because if we've lost something, it makes us more motivated. And then, of course, Trump, "Make America Great Again."
Yeah.
Again.
So I think it's a really real powerful thing that they've done there, and it sounds really cynical, but I happen to know none of the people involved, and they are far from, the Deb Madison, who's the head of strategy in that team, is amazing, and she wouldn't have let any cynical stuff through. It's amazing. I think that's a really interesting example of something where you see, I've seen this problem before. And that's part of my methodology is what kind of problem? Let's triage the problem.
Yeah.
I've seen this somewhere before. What kind of solutions are there to this kind of problem? Let's go see with those and play with them. So as a process to get to using behavioural science, I think that's a really useful one. The danger is that you end up, if you don't do that, you boil the ocean.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's that chart. It was 140 cognitive biases. That compass chart that was doing the rounds a couple of years ago. It's lovely. It's beautiful. It hurts my eyes and gives me a migraine. But that's aside. I just think that where do you start? I'm interested in application. Mm-hmm. I'm interested in making a difference with this stuff rather than being absolutely right. And if you triage, you clear the ground a bit and go, it's this kind of thing. It also allows you to do something that my book Copy advises people to do, which is to steal from elsewhere.
Yes.
And so steal from elsewhere, and there's, it's a fairly safe steal, but because other politicians have used it. But
I think that I love that as an example. I think it's something that could definitely be applied more in advertising. I've heard other industries are much more adept at taking examples from elsewhere, that consultants, when they promote an idea, will be skeptical if it hasn't worked elsewhere.
Totally.
Whereas in advertising, it's anathema to us to be told, someone did that in Hong Kong.
I think that's right. I think there's an originality issue, which is just a complete. There's some of it. There's a rip-off copying kind of originality question, which I think we could park that and go, yes. That's drop. And there's always something in the advertising creative awards about that. Which nobody wants to stand up and go, I stole this from somewhere else. But I think the idea that you can open yourself out is really important. In Copy, I tell this story about Professor Martin Elliott, who's professor of pediatric cardiology. So he's a heart surgeon for kids at the Great Ormond Street Hospital, which is one of the three great hospitals in the world, children's hospitals in the world. He's just amazing. And he changed the protocol they used in heart surgery. And these little kids, they're 2-3 weeks old. They're like this big. And the operations last 12 hours. And there's a team of people around with lots of wires and tubes and, and there was error count how can we reduce the error count? How can we do that? And you'd normally do that by some kind of engineering solution.
Right.
But instead, he said he sat down one Sunday afternoon and was watching the highlights of Formula One and went, pit stops. They're brilliant at doing that. Because when I was a kid, when he was a kid, I think it took longer, but when I was a kid, pit stops lasted a minute or so. And it'd be once every couple of races, there's some terrible accident, the wheel would fall off afterwards, or there'd be some fuel line, and it'd just be awful. But it hasn't happened for years. And pit stops now take 3 seconds. 3.5 seconds if they're doing badly. So take the protocol. What do they know? Get the guys in from McLaren and then Ferrari. Get them to review our process, and we will then practice that. And within months, there's a significant 142% reduction. It's just ridiculous in error count. It's just fantastic. So I think that we should do more of that. I'm really happy. That's why we do this with behavioural science, right? Because we haven't actually done the base experiments. We haven't established it. We go, okay, so that's an interesting thing. Let's see if we can test that, if that applies over here. Yeah. Rather than think I've got to go into a darkened room for 3 days. with black coffee and
Absolutely.
a cocktail.
I remember reading a study by, I think it was Goreville, into this pennies a day effect.
Yes.
If you ask them for a donation of $1 a day, they're more likely to do it than $350 a year. And trying to persuade clients to change their marketing, to stop saying as a broadband provider, we cost £30 a month, and start saying £1 a day. Many of those people responded by saying, well, charity is too different a world. It has no relevance to us. So then thinking, well, there's a halfway house of rerunning the Goreville study, but changing the brand that's used. We get rid of the charity and replace it with a commercial category. And absolutely taking an idea from one field, rerunning it with a few different tweaks to make it relevant to another, I think is a really fertile way of organising a research program.
Yeah, totally. And bringing the science in, because that's what we're really about. It's not about being absolutely right. None of us is going to win the Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
Well, you might, but I won't. And none of us going to win the Nobel Prize. What it's about is about changing the world, making it better, and helping our clients and the organisations that we serve do better stuff by bringing science in.
So, Mark, maybe you can share with the listeners, how do you help a brand or help a agency get those tests sold in? How do we get people to say, well, we may not change everything today, but how do you make folks comfortable with starting to test this? What's things that you've seen?
I think you use the same kind of approach that you use in product design. Right? So in innovation, what you don't do is go build the new thing, build the new business straight off the bat. What you do is do a paper version and test it. And when I say test it, you don't have to have any researchers doing it. You do this. Richard tells some great stories in your first book about you going and designing experiment and running it yourself.
Yep.
You can do this.
Yes.
I've made clients do this. Write the paper thing, go out in the streets, find people, show them it, see if it works.
Get reactions.
Get reactions, and you do it. Don't wait for the research and insights team. You do it. If you're a creative guy or an account woman, you just go and do it. Make it happen.
I think there's a hell of a lot to be said for that. That actually running it yourself shows you a huge amount of things. Even if the experiment is a complete debacle, that interaction with your product in a realistic situation.
Totally. I mean, that's a lot of my work now in consulting is not about me going away and having a good idea, frankly. You know, I've long ago accepted that there are better people at doing that than me. But it's helping other people have really good ideas and helping them do it simply.
Yeah.
So make the simple thing. Make them, if you've got 7 ideas about possible propositions, write them on a card, show them to people.
Yeah.
Go and do it. And then come back and tell me this afternoon what happened. And rather than having the insights team or some very expensive research agency go off and do, let's tell me about the lives of tuk-tuk drivers and their aspirations, so on. You, leadership team, off you go.
Yeah.
And then come back and we're going to debrief. And by process of going to do it, focusing on the thing, meeting the people, having some reality you talked about before, some personal connection with it, and then also processing it together, you then learn an awful lot. And you go much faster than you would do otherwise. Yeah. And it's much cheaper and therefore much less risk.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like being a tennis player. You can't learn an amazing serve by someone writing down 50 things that you have to do. You have to generate the muscle memory and do it again and again. Maybe research is the same thing.
I think so. I think it just there's so much in the contemporary corporation. We've specialised and siloised things that we shouldn't have. And again, most of my work is breaking down silos, bringing people together and doing stuff together. That I ran this huge 18-month program of innovation and for a particular client this last year, and they and between them, people who'd never done anything like this before created 6 new businesses ready for MVP testing. 6 new businesses with full validation, quantitative validation of the propositions and the base experience. Now let's build, and they've got a business case to do each of those. So that's that you have to do it that way. You can't go, we're going to have this brilliant strategy which is going to reach for the moon. You have to build stuff.
Yeah.
And then build some more stuff. And you don't get the $1 billion now. You get it on the basis of the repeated attempts to learn and the learning that flows back and how you as a team get it. Apart from anything else. And we I think you and I both come from this advertising background where it seems to be about the message. I think somehow about the message or that stuff. I think the really big deal here is that we need to get people used to the things, experiences, products, and how they change people's lives, how they interact with people's lives, rather than, it's easy. It's always easy to go, let's just say something that's cute.
Yeah. I think it's very empowering to younger listeners to hear it's not so sacred. It's not so special. And I think what you learn later in your career is that no decision is so grave that you cannot make another decision to change it down the road. So what you're encouraging our listeners to do, Mark, is to say, get your hands dirty, be with the buyers, learn what they need and what they want.
And understand their lives and like them.
Yeah.
Be part of them, because you know, it's no point. The cynicism we talked about before that comes, it easily leaks out into people's view of you. And you'll just be another marketing brand.
Yeah.
Doing the marketing shtick.
And I could tell you in America, there's really, to build on a second concept that you said, there's a real thought that marketing is just advertising. It's just the message.
Totally.
Where there's so much more to building a brand than just what the creative is. And so that's really what you're talking about here.
Absolutely. And you can, we can influence the product. I mean, in fact, we can make products. We can.
Yeah.
With people who know how to do that stuff. But what we can't do is do it on our own. And so one extreme is we do it on our own. The other extreme is that we just do pictures and words. And that's, none of those things are acceptable anymore.
Yeah.
The biggest challenge most organizations have is that they don't speak to each other. So if we could find a way to link them up, imagine that.
Amazing. I don't want to end our conversation here without asking you to talk just for a few minutes on your view of the future and specifically the work you're doing now. We were talking about it before in the green room, and it's an empowering, fascinating topic. Would you be willing to share a little?
Yeah, no, sure. The book would probably be called Time Travel for Beginners, right? Because I think that our ability to do mental time travel is the greatest gift that we've been given. Apart from being a social species, right? But, so
it's a provocative statement, Mark.
Yeah, no, okay. So let me give you the reason why it's important.
Yes.
We live in an age where the global population are more affluent than ever before. But with that growth in affluence has come a growth in time poverty. Everybody has less time than they thought. And the one thing we know about decision-making under pressure of time is that it worsens. The more you do it, the worse it gets. I mean, time poverty has a number of other things, like it affects your health, your relationships, your ability to get to the healthcare you need. It affects your body in all kinds of horrible ways, heart and your brain as well. It's just horrible. So, but time poverty is really a bad way to make any good decisions in. The answer is not more productivity apps. The US spent $39 billion last year on productivity software, and the US GDP growth was 2% and a bit, right? We all know I've got calendars coming out my ears. I've got ways of booking meetings. I've got all of that. I've got things that I diarize myself. I check in and I have moments of mindfulness and just, we've got it all, right? That's not the answer. It's not the answer. The answer is that actually between the tick and the tock of this clock time world that's pressuring us, actually, if you use this skill that we were given as we had it as kids, you can imagine lots of different futures. Use it, make those futures really real, and ask yourself, what do I need to do today to prepare for that future, that future, that future, that future, that future? If you're thinking there's going to be a reorg at work, right? Because we all know what that
happens. Yeah.
Well, to think about it ahead of time. Don't wait for the worst thing to happen or the best thing. Look at the whole range of stuff and prepare yourself and start doing today a portfolio of actions that start to prepare you. If you're a business, that's the way to avoid being blindsided. Because normally businesses think about the future and think about future scenarios. They go, the one we want, which is us ruling the universe, then the one we don't want, instead of that's somewhere away from that, which is a scary thing, and we'll be out of business. We don't want that. We don't have those two things. So let's go for the middling one. Or we go, small, medium, large budget size. It's the same sort of rough thing. Do lots of them. Similarly, looking at your past, we're all enslaved by our pasts, with ideas about ourselves that we grew up with. Businesses have this all the time, where we think we come from, what we can do because that's who we are. And very often those memories are just as unhelpful as the ones we have as individuals. So you can remake those and create different parts of yourselves. You can look side to side. As a kid, I was able to read books and go into different worlds where they had hobbits and shit, and through that wall there's Narnia and all that. And so when we can do this, right? The great Terry Pratchett, science fiction writer, sadly departed, wrote a book called The Long Earth, where he actually has a series of Earths that exist exactly in parallel and evolved in slightly different ways, just because one thing leads to another. And somebody discovers they can jump between them. We can do that. We can all do it if you just focus on it and you make these things tangible and practical, as you were saying before, really real. And you think, what do I have to do to prepare for that? Not all the solution, not like a risk register mitigation. You go, what's the simple thing I can do today, this week, this month, this quarter to actually be a bit closer to preparing? You can do that. And then you think about it, all of us are one day going to be out of here. We're all going to make our final presentation and we're all going to be gone. There's lots of good, interesting research about what thinking about your own mortality, thinking about the end does to you. And it can make you bitter and twisted. It can make you tribal. And, that's the surprising thing. I thought was going to make people nicer, but it doesn't. But if you actually start at the end and work your way back and go, I've got, say, 3 years in this job that I'm doing, you might say, my condition to leave that happily is to have achieved this. So if that's what I have to achieve, I have to work back from that, what I have to do today in order to take enough steps to get to there. So that's the kind of thing. That's time travel, right? Brilliant. And we all do it. We all do it all the time, and we can get trapped with time. But if we actually use these abilities in a structured way, and there are lots of good examples from other cultures, from forgotten bits of research, from some guy who invented memories of the future. Mm-hmm. So you can make much more of the space between the tick and the tock, the tick and the tock. This pressure of time poverty.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Earls.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. As we come to a close, Mark, thank you for sharing and for giving us access to these ideas. We always close with a fun, lighthearted question. Mm-hmm. The thing that you're reading that's most provocative right now, the thing that you've watched or that's got you thinking in a different way.
Ted Lasso.
Yeah.
Ted Lasso, I think it's the best thing on telly for years, to be honest. And for two reasons. One of which is, isn't it nice to see people being decent to each other? Isn't that lovely? And isn't it nice to see people learning to live with each other properly and learning to respect each other? For me, that's really important. It's something we're missing gravely in the world and also in many of the organisations that I work with. Yeah. So more Ted Lasso, please. Be more like Ted.
Thank you to Mark for spending time with us today. As we come to a close, if you'd like to leave a comment, reach out, leave a review. We're always looking for the next topics to cover, the next things for us to dive deep on. Until then, this is Behavioral Science for Brands. Have a great day.